philosophical side has to be examined too. And that's what this book really does, the philosophical and existential side of reality.
So there's 9 chapters here, and these isms are taken chapter by chapter. You and Vince go back and forth in the way you structure it. Vince, people have had 4.5 decades to find out about Ravi Zacharias, his story, his salvation, the crises, the moments of decision in his life. Before you became a Christ follower, were you worshiping these secular gods, or one of these gods, or some of them?
Yeah, thanks. I certainly would say that I was. Ravi said in the earlier segment, not to play God. And that's really what I wanted to do, wanted to play God. Nietzsche said, if there were gods, how could I bear not to be a god? And that's a line that resonated with the person that I was. Kierkegaard said, if I ask you for a glass of water, even if you bring me a better drink, I'll be indignant just because you didn't give me what I wanted. And that's what I really want. Those are quotations that characterize where I was. And the justification that I had erected to be able to play God was rationalism. I had assumed that faith was blind. I had assumed that reason and faith were contradictory. And it was when I showed up at Princeton to study philosophy, I was very blessed to meet some thinking Christians who encouraged me to read the Bible for the first time. And when I opened it up, I was just incredibly surprised to see the Bible talking about examining and refuting and arguing and debating and even proving. And, for me, the idea that faith could be rational opened up incredible horizons. I then encountered the evidence for the resurrection of Jesus. I couldn't believe how strong I was finding it. So I got in touch with the 2 top religion professors at the university, and I said, would you talk with me about this? I said, I'm seeing this evidence, the eruption of Christianity, an empty tomb, hundreds of people who were utterly convinced that they had seen this man after he had clearly been killed. As Ravi was saying, criticism without alternative is empty. If you don't explain that by the resurrection, how do you explain it? And one of them glanced without conviction towards a mass hallucination theory, which is riddled with problems and has earned no credibility in the scholarly literature. The other one told me that as a historian, he simply wasn't interested in the question. And I began to wonder whether G.K. Chesterton was right, that Christianity hadn't been tried and found wanting. It had been found difficult and left untried. And so for me, clearing away the intellectual objections, clearing away the obstacles of the mind, it allowed me to open up my heart to Jesus. It allowed me to recognize the reality of sin in my life. It allowed me to get to that honest place before God. And, for me, it was May of the year 2000. I can remember I was in my dorm room, 122 Jolene Hall. I was by myself, but I was just overcome with the reality of God. And I exclaimed out loud, man, this really happened. And that was the beginning of me living in a daily relationship with Jesus.
Aren't you glad it really happened? So Ravi, Vince sent me this, and you guys can figure out who wants to answer it, but I learned from your organization in preparing for the interview that Oxford English Dictionary made post-truth, hyphenated, post-truth, their word of the year. I'm going to read that again. Oxford English Dictionary made post-truth their word of the year. Do either one of you wish to sober us as to what that means in today's society when it comes to the deep questions of life?
Sure. Well, I can get us started, and Ravi can give a deeper answer if he likes to.
Yeah, Ravi, just try to stay up with us if you don't mind.
Yeah, this was fascinating. We had already submitted the manuscript, and this is part of what Ravi spoke of in the earlier segment, the way this book seems to be getting more timely. After we had submitted the manuscript, The Economist wrote an article about us living in the post-truth society, and then Oxford English Dictionary made post-truth their word of the year for 2016. And
what is that all about?
I think there's a number of different things going on here, but here's one of them. I think we're being pushed into a cultural ultimatum between love and truth. You can only choose one or the other. Either you're on the side of truth or you're on the side of love. And in our society of microaggressions and trigger words and safe spaces and speakers being no platformed if they have anything controversial that they might bring to a university, truth is seen as dangerous. And there's this assumption that truth of its nature is offensive, and that disagreement with someone will lead you on a trajectory to the devaluing of them, and then to the intolerance of them, and then to extremism, and then to violence, and then to terrorism. And so if you're committed to truth, you're actually a terrorist in the making. And faced with that ultimatum, I think most of Western society is fleeing from the truth to this post-truth culture. Now, I think there's a real irony here, because a post-truth culture is inevitably also a post-love culture, because there's nothing more unloving than refusing to share the truth with another person. If you have a truth that can greatly benefit someone, it is an act against love not to share it with them. Even if you have a difficult truth. I have a friend whose father has been unfaithful. He's just found out for many years. And he refused to share that truth with the family. And now that family is living with the consequences of his trying to live in a post-truth way. Now, here's the amazing thing about Christianity. It refuses to make a choice between love and truth, because God is truth. Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. And God is love. Therefore, truth is love. And what our calling is to absolutely refuse to separate the two. And that's what the gospel is.
So maybe you ought to hire this guy. I'm just thinking, just saying. So when I first met you, and when Jeff and I, guys like us, were in early formation 25, 30 years ago, the phrase was postmodern, right? Now we've moved to post-truth. Where does post-truth take us? What are the consequences of a post-truth word and all that represents? What's the consequences in society?
You know, the term has two meanings. If you were to ask an Oxonian, they'll probably tell you this in defense of what they're trying to do. The hard meaning they want to have is really that there are no absolutes. There's no such thing as truth. But the soft meaning is what they really are going with, that you cannot ultimately know the truth. They're just facts. They're not necessarily self-revealing truths. And it came in the context of the political process. And the interesting thing about the Economist article on post-truth is that 90% of the illustrations given about how truth doesn't matter is about the present president-elect. Just one single statement about the other candidate that was also running, which told me that the journalist was playing the same game. They were not really telling the truth. They weren't equally distributing the weight of responsibility for every candidate to tell the truth. It was tendentious, using it in one direction. But the whole idea is of that, whatever you feel you need to say, truth is governed by emotions, not by reality and facts. That's the softer and real meaning. When you think of what Winston Churchill said, that truth is the most valuable thing in the world, so valuable that it is often protected by a bodyguard of lies. And Natan Sharansky, the former justice minister of Israel, held as a political prisoner in Russia, when he went to Russia, went to lay a wreath at Andrei Sakharov's grave. Sakharov is the one who gave to the Soviets the atomic bomb. And Sharansky, after he laid the wreath, following his few minutes in the prison where they had kept him in solitary confinement, and he told his wife, "This is where I really found myself." He goes and lays the wreath, comes out, and a battery of microphones waiting for him. Here's what he said. Before Sakharov died, he made this comment: "I always thought that the most powerful weapon in the world was the bomb." He said, "I've changed my mind. The most powerful weapon in the world is the truth." So if truth is the most powerful weapon and the most valuable thing, and we are living in this society without the most powerful weapon and without the most valuable thing, we go to alternative weapons and to a terrain of lies. We are lied to by the media. As what Muggeridge said, the lie is stuck like a fishbone in the throat of the microphone. And it used to be that the Soviets were charged with that. Pravda means truth, izvestia means news. And they used to say there's no pravda in izvestia and no izvestia in pravda. There's no truth in the news and no news in the truth. We're now living with that kind of the tendentious use of knowledge by the media today, leading us into where they want us to go. By fabricating stories, they can destroy people. And so a generation that doesn't believe in the truth, why they're going to believe in the absolute revelation of Jesus Christ. And yet, Pilate stood in front of him and did the same thing. He said, "What is truth?" and walked away, never waited for the answer. When you find truth embodied, it is greater than merely a proposition. Truth is primarily the property of propositions, and all truth converged in the incarnation in the person of Jesus Christ, so that he is the truth, and everything he said was the truth. And he said, "They that are on the side of truth, listen to me." In not listening to him, this generation has concluded there is no such thing as truth.
That's where it's going. Vince, in an earlier time I had with Ravi, he talked about your writing about scientism as one of the isms listed here, 7 or 8 that you have. Acquaint us with scientism as it is a god of this world.
Sure. Well, scientism is, the idea that as science continues to explain things, we no longer have any need for God as an explanation. And last weekend, I was actually on a debate show, a BBC debate show called The Big Questions. And underlying the whole discussion on that show was this assumption that science disproves God. And if you could have seen me, I was just bouncing up and down on the edge of my seat, trying to get the moderator's attention to let me in to say something, because I think that is such a grave misconception. This is what I would have said if they had come to me. When you think about science and God, arguably the two most significant scientific discoveries in all of cosmology in the last 100 years point strongly to God. One, that the universe has a beginning. And if it has a beginning, then there had to be something that got it started, that gave it that beginning. And that sounds very familiar to a Christian. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And there were great scientists at the time who resisted believing that the universe had a beginning precisely because they didn't like how well it cohered with the Christian faith. Then a second discovery, that the universe is incredibly finely tuned for the existence of life. The probability that we could have gotten life just by randomness in this universe, not just on our planet, not just life as we know it, but any form of life anywhere in the universe, is utterly, utterly minuscule. One scientist, and this is not just theist scientists, it's atheists alike who claim this, one scientist puts the probability at 1 part in 10, raised to the power of 10, raised to the power of 123. If we were to write out that as a percentage, there would be more zeros than there are particles in the universe. That's the sort of probability we're talking about just by randomness. But if you have a God who is powerful, who is intelligent, who is creative, who is loving, then it makes perfect sense that we would have a universe that would be designed in this way. Let me just add one further thought on this. The regularity of the universe. The fact that the universe does proceed in patterns, in ways that are regular and scientifically explainable. There's no explanation for that if you take God out of the picture. Why would a random universe produce the sort of regularity that we could look at scientifically? However, you have an explanation of that if you have a God who desired relationship with people, who desired to create people into a stable environment where they could find meaning. Einstein said the most incomprehensible thing about the universe is its comprehensibility. And so people often say, I have friends, and we always try to think of someone to have in mind, but I have friends who say, I couldn't be a Christian because I'm a scientist. Not only do I think that science doesn't disprove God, but I actually think that only God proves science.
Ravi, last question, and we want to tell people how to get this book. 44 years of ministry now. You have spent decades looking at these secular gods, talking to the best and brightest to defend these gods. You've looked at histories, definitions, and characters, players of these gods. At the end of the day, why do you still believe Jesus Christ is the right choice?
My whole life is spent in answering that question, John, and I'd like Vince to take a shot at it too. We have a little time here. When you ask questions of life, the questions have to be justifiable. The questions have to be justifiable. I believe most of the skeptics' questions are not even justified in their worldview, morality, meaning, hope, relationship, all of these issues that come up. Why does it even matter if we're the random collocation of atoms and a blip on the radar screen of time? Our hearts long. They long for meaning. It is the ultimate pursuit. That's why university students are crowding these open forums wherever we go. They've tried it with hedonism. They've lived it out. They've emptied themselves. They've done all of the exploits they want to, and they come away emptier than before. Only in Christ do you find the perpetual novelty. And so I believe in the four foundations of living: eternity, morality, accountability, charity, existence, essence, conscience, beneficence. Those four pillars are what we long for and are only explainable in the person and the work of Jesus Christ. No other worldview deals with grace, truth, and love the way Jesus Christ did. And in his incarnation, in his life and death and resurrection, there is no other entity on the face of the earth before or now who ever comes close to the coherence that Christ gives to life, meaning, and hope. I will always believe. I came to know Christ on a bed of suicide. I had no hope and no meaning. Now I have the full understanding of what life is really about, and I want to live for him and serve him and answer the questions the way he did, so that people will find in him the way, the truth, and the life.
Well, I certainly can't put it any better than that, Ravi. But I think, personally, I would just say I've lived with Jesus. That's my primary answer to that question. Someone once said you can choose a coat in two different ways. You can get your ruler out and you can look at all the measurements, or you can pick the coat up and you can try it on. And I think both are important. For me, part of getting to my heart initially was looking at some of the measurements and the philosophy and the science and the history and clearing away some of those intellectual objections. But ultimately, it's been, actually clothing oneself with Christ and living in the context of that relationship. And I know what was in my heart before I became a Christian. I know that without Christ, I would very likely be an unfaithful friend, an unfaithful husband, headed for a destroyed marriage. The life and the fruitfulness that I have seen in relationships living with Christ has been remarkable and completely different. One of the people who I most recently saw come to faith, he had done the measurements, but he knew